All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Traffic Corner Tuesday. My name is Nancy Crow, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing for SPAC Consulting. I'm also going to be your host for today. We originally presented this webinar earlier this year, so if you saw it back in the summer, welcome back. It was one of our most popular webinar series, and we are doing a repeat today. So thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple housekeeping details. First, please mute your mics. This is going to reduce the background noise so that everyone can hear the presentation clearly. And second, join in the conversation. The webinar is intended to be interactive, and I would encourage every one of the attendees to go ahead and ask some questions or share your experience. Just click the little chat box that's on the side of your screen. Also, for any of you who may be new to Traffic Corner Tuesday, this webinar series is brought to you by SPAC Consulting, which is part of the SPAC Enterprise family of companies. The SPAC Enterprise family of companies consists of 6 different traffic engineering related companies that provide a range of products and services, including traffic study consulting services, traffic data collection products, and free trip generation data. So feel free to learn more about us by visiting any of our websites or going to our blog, Mike on Traffic, to learn more. All right, just having momentary, there we go. All right, upcoming Traffic Corner Tuesday schedules. We have a slightly lighter schedule heading into the fall. We will be doing Traffic Corner Tuesday just once a month in October and November. We're looking forward to a really robust conversation around retail stores in October and school circulation plan case study in November. So hope everyone can join us for that. Look for some emails announcing those dates and times, and we encourage anyone else to sign up for those sessions. Also, I want to say, before I introduce our speakers today, I want to take a moment to thank you for participating in today's session. As a special thank you for attending today's session, we are offering a free guide called 16 Ways Vehicles Will Change Land Development. So be sure to stay until the end of the presentation to learn how you can get your free copy. All right, finally, I am going to introduce our speakers. Today, our presentation is provided by Mike Spack and Bryant Fisick. Mike Spack is the president of SPAC Consulting, and he is the recognized authority on traffic studies. He is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, past president of the North Central section of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and he is a fellow of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Since 1996, Mike has led over 1,000 traffic engineering projects, and during the past 2 decades, Mike has founded 4 companies, including SPAC Consulting. He is also the creative force and principal writing of the industry-leading blog Mike on Traffic, which many of you may be familiar with. He is an accomplished author with articles published in many industry publications, and he's written several industry manuals that are used by engineers around the world. Also joining us today is Bryant Fisick. He is the Vice President of SPAC Consulting. He is also widely known in the transportation industry, having managed more than 700 traffic engineering projects. He is also a graduate of the University of Minnesota, and he is an expert in Synchro, SimTraffic, Vistro, and vSim traffic modeling software. Bryant thrives on developing creative solutions to traffic and transportation issues, and he is a regular contributor of the Mike on Traffic blog. Bryant has numerous articles in industry publications. He is also the co-author of several industry manuals. Please join me in welcoming Mike and Bryant.
Thanks, Nancy. Thank you. Yeah. So we're back at it. Mike and Bryant here. Thanks everyone who showed up. As Nancy mentioned, this was one of our more popular webinars earlier this summer, so we're running it again. Today we are going to be really covering 3 topics related to autonomous vehicles. First being just what's the status? Where do we think the state of the industry is at, and when are autonomous vehicles coming? Then we're going to talk a little bit about different safety and mobility angles around autonomous vehicles. And lastly, what does this mean?
That's always the key.
Yeah, what should us traffic engineers be doing right now and in the near-term future, as autonomous vehicles are likely coming in the not quite near future?
All right, so first question right off the bat, when?
Yeah.
What does this mean? When are autonomous vehicles coming, or connected vehicles? What are we looking at? So on our slide here, we have
this is
a bunch of headlines.
Yeah, an eye chart, not meant to be fully read, but these are a lot of key people in our industry wondering talking about when these things are coming. And what you can see here, the trends are basically a lot of the people on the production side are saying, give or take 2020.
Yeah, and the last bullet there, Uber has said they're going to be driverless by 2030. So lots of predictions about what's coming. Just as a kind of counterpoint to that, I did see a presentation by John Leonard at Toyota, who's on loan to Toyota from MIT, and his basic premise is, do you really want Siri driving your cars? So, with lots of predictions about what's coming, everybody's working on it, but are we there yet? No, but hopefully we'll get there.
Yes, and obviously our industry has a much different standard than kind of the technology where with your iPhone you can be rolling out new iterations, but kind of based on airplanes, railroads, and vehicles, we have much higher safety and redundancy standards. So the next chart I found kind of talks about when. So the status of when we think autonomous vehicles are coming. This is a really interesting historical chart going through some of the different disruptive technologies we've had here, largely looking at the United States and how fast do we get to the adoption curve. And kind of we can see here between 40 and 60%, so this is half the households have adopted new technologies. We can see here, kind of clothes washers, radios were a big one that came on fast, clothes dryers. But then we kind of, as time goes on, we get to the 70s, 80s, 90s, we can see the shape of these adoption curves.
It's a lot more vertical, so it just means that we're adopting new technology quicker than previously. It would take a long time to get to 50, 60% use by everyone, and now seemingly just a few years we adopt something that quick.
Yeah, one key difference or interesting point in my mind, talking to one of the guys here at work, is just, are autonomous vehicles a huge disruption of a brand new thing that is just great, or is it an incremental change? And I think time is still out on that a lot of like VCRs, well, that was a brand new thing. Sure, we had television, but being able to watch movies in your house, everybody jumped on that really fast. Then again, maybe cell phones, if we consider that cell phone just replacing a landline, if it's just a phone as it was in the early days, well, that happened pretty fast. And so that was replacing one technology with another. So I just think this is interesting that we're on a faster pace now.
And this is a similar chart, but again, just shows how long did it take, how many years did it take to get to 1/4 of the U.S. using the different technologies in there. So again, over time, you can see we've become faster adopters of the new technology. So going from a long time for electricity all the way to, it took 46 years for that, down to 7 for the internet and the web. So the adoption tends to be quicker as we move along.
Next point to talk about is kind of mobility, and then we'll talk about safety. And right now, from everything we've read and our own thought experiments, it's going to be a mixed bag, especially in the transition period where autonomous vehicles are mixing with human drivers. A very interesting piece of work led by Professor Daniel Work at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. They did a study where first they modeled putting in a few autonomous vehicles into the traffic stream and saw that just a few cars being controlled by computers could eliminate what we call phantom shock waves. This is where somebody just, for some unknown reason, slams on their brakes, everybody behind them then slams on the brake, and there you've created congestion. Those traffic jams, those waves sometimes can take a half an hour or more to dissipate.
I think we've all seen those where you get up to where it frees up again and you go, what did everybody stop for? Why was there a break in traffic flow?
Yeah, but Dr. Work and the other folks working on this study found that in the modeling, that just having 5% of the traffic stream being autonomous vehicles, they immediately dampen that shock wave and eliminate it. That really interesting piece of work is they took that concept out to the test track and put a couple of autonomous vehicles in their stream of cars going around a test track, creating a phantom wave, somebody slamming on the brake without everybody knowing. And then the autonomous vehicles, when those were turned on with a simple algorithm, they proved to be able to dampen that shock wave. So this tells me for our freeway systems, this could be just a home run very quickly.
Second point, the improved signal timing, right on their shorter gap acceptance. Just as you move towards automated vehicles, they can be coordinated with the timing. You can get them to move in a platoon easier. So we can easily see how that can improve our signal timing. You can get the cars so they're all going the same speed. You can have them be timed to reach an intersection at a particular point to all move through together. So there's lots of various ways that we can see how, as the cars get connected, as they get automated, your intersections will run smoother too. And there's a thought out there too that eventually, if everything is automated, if they're all talking to each other, do you even need a signal? The cars will just talk to each other and they'll flow through the intersection accordingly. So that's probably further off than 2020, but still it's in the realm of possibility. Yes. That we could see it at some point.
Yeah, we could foresee a time when we don't need traffic signals, may not even need traffic signs. If everybody has a smartphone in their pocket or some heads-up display or whatever, everybody knows where they're going. The cars know where they're going. All of a sudden, a lot of the warning signs on the road, all of that stuff is not needed anymore. A next theory is we will likely have a lot less vehicles on the road. Right now, the average car is driven a little less than an hour a day. Basically, the commute back and forth to work and maybe a short trip afterwards or before. But with an Uber, a Lyft, kind of a robo-taxi idea of car sharing, all of a sudden, if we can have those cars working 2 hours a day, picking up and dropping off people, still working the rush hour periods, all of a sudden we could cut the vehicle fleet in half. And then if we actually get it so those vehicles are being productive 4 hours a day, you cut that in half again. So it is theoretical that we could cut the fleet of vehicles on the road 75%.
The counter argument is obviously everybody wants their own vehicle.
Yes.
And that has been true in the past, but if we look at millennials, they're much more willing to share vehicles. They're much more willing to be part of that sharing environment. So if you grow up doing that, and as future generations come up with that sharing, again, it's conceivable to see that there's fewer vehicles, but those vehicles are traveling more miles.
Right. But so number 3 here on the list is vehicle miles traveled could go up, and is actually quite likely as these cars are driving around and circling. Most of our cars are parked for 23 hours a day or more right now. Even if we cut the vehicle fleet in half, that half, those 50% of cars are going to be driving around waiting to pick up people potentially, or they're dropping you off if it's your own personal vehicle, and then dropping you off in the central business district where you work, then either going to a parking ramp on the edge of the CBD or even going all the way back home. So there are many scenarios where we could be hitting the actual roads with a lot more circling vehicles.
Transit is next on the list, and this one again gets back to our mixed bag. Is what does happen to transit? Do we have obviously one option would be the automated buses. You still have the routes, but you don't need the drivers. They're going around on their fixed routes picking people up. But the other option would be moving towards more of just the single vehicle and almost the auto taxi, if you want to call it that. But do you go into your phone or some other type of application and call up the vehicle when you need it, and the transit single occupant vehicle comes and gets you and takes you where you need to go. So it's kind of a split as to what really happens with transit.
Yes, and a big issue in the transit community, especially if we're talking light rail or bus rapid transit or commuter trains, is kind of the last mile of the train can get you reasonably close to your destination or reasonably close to where you're picked up, but then that short distance on either end, and do we have little pods helping connect either end? So lots of different ways transit could be a mixed bag. Okay. So it seems like our audio is getting spotty. Not sure where to go with that right now. So bear with us, please. Audio test, is that any better? If someone could reply in the chat, is the audio any better with a different USB port? Okay. Thank you, Santosh.
All right, let's continue on then.
Okay. So with that, we need to pick up the pace a little bit. One area, a huge improvement that everybody's predicting is the improvement of safety. And whether it's overall crashes or just fatal crashes, this is a very standard chart of data. I've seen many of these, but basically we're predicting, or the data shows, somewhere 90 to 95% of crashes are caused by driver error, not the vehicles themselves, not the environment. So the thought experiment, it's a pretty easy one. If we're going toward 0 deaths, and drivers are causing 90% or more of those deaths, those fatalities, well, going to a fully autonomous fleet is going to cut 35,000 fatal crashes a year down to 3,500 fatal crashes a year.
Yep. And this also gets back to, we briefly mentioned it earlier, but at what point does government step in and require autonomous vehicles? Where does that come into the line of saying, you know what, we can reduce the crashes, we can reduce the fatalities if we get humans out of the driver's seat?
Yes, and we see a time in the future of kind of that 25 to 75% adoption rate, somewhere in there. The government's going to step in and say, okay, you have 2 years to retrofit your car or buy a new car. It's not legal for a human being to drive on public streets anymore. So what do we do with all of this? and what do we do in this transition period? The first area is basically we believe a lot of our infrastructure can just become narrower. The vehicle, right now we have 12 to 14 foot lanes out on the many streets, and autonomous vehicles are going to be able to deal with 9 to 10 foot lanes, maybe even 8. Or if the vehicle fleet, these pods become narrower, I mean, we can greatly reduce these down So we believe a first step is stop speccing out 12-foot lanes, that at least start skinning them up to 11 feet, and in slower speed environments go down to 10 feet.
Yeah, I think that's a very easy first step that we can even do today for human drivers. And there's obviously other benefits in terms of slowing traffic down a little bit in some urban areas.
And we're going to start to see more road diets, convert those 4-lane undivided to 3-lane. That's been kind of a mantra in the industry for a decade now. Don't exactly agree with this drawing by Perkins and Will. They're showing some wider lanes than I would like, but the thought experiment, if we're cutting the vehicle fleet in half, or even cutting it 75%, we can start to get narrower and narrower roads, which means less and less lanes, which means maybe we need less right of way. Right now, at least a lot of the jurisdictions we work in kind of have very conservative right of way requirements, so they know they can fit in everything they would possibly want to fit in 20 years from now. It is
on the assumption that traffic will continue to grow and no disruption like we're talking about.
So I think it's a reasonable thought experiment in most comprehensive plans that cities start thinking through the right-of-way requirements and can they skinny them up.
So 2 other quick thoughts on that. One, you can see the parking lane got eliminated in that drawing. So if you have an autonomous vehicle, it doesn't need to park right next to anything. You can have it circulate throughout. And just to answer a quick question from George, it was how do the narrow lanes work with trucks? And this is where we would have to start looking at specific truck routes. Do trucks need to be on every street? So you could have narrower residential roads or places where you don't expect trucks or they are very rare, and then have designated routes where, you may have to go back to 10-foot lanes.
Yes, and beyond that, okay, a truck can operate in an 11-foot lane. The research is coming out that actually many people believe that autonomous vehicles are going to come to semi-trucks, especially the long-haul cross-country trucks, that they're going to come there first. The cost-benefit is just much higher to get the drivers out. So they are going to be able to deal with narrower lanes as well.
Next one. So this is as we start looking at how do people get to the stores they want? How do you create that smooth flow of traffic? So that's the challenge that you start looking at. What does the access looks like? And so what we're looking at are the 3 bullet points there, just dedicated drop-off zones, pickup zones. So we think your retail component is going to be much similar to a school where you have a big contingent of cars that come in and drop them off. You want that long pickup drop-off area. So with the autonomous vehicle, they come in, they drop them off right in front of the front doors or very close to, and then the car moves on. So,
but that happens right across the front door where we have all the pedestrians who are actually parking, crossing over. So like a school where we want to get buses and staff and walkers and the drop-offs, we actually want those different movements happening at different points so they're away from each other. We need to start thinking through the sites. And also as we get into the more urban areas, we need to start thinking through, okay, we have an apartment building and now we're saying kind of New York experienced this forever with taxis, but now with Uber and Lyft taking off, we should be thinking about more pickup drop-off zones at a front door space so we can take the Uber drivers off of the public street and have some kind of portico with an awning maybe for people to be waiting. So those are things that we're starting to see in some of the bigger developments around.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, is that this isn't one that needs to wait for autonomous vehicles. We're already seeing the need for those drop-off pickup areas. So this is something that can be incorporated immediately as you think about these sites.
Yes. Another one is just right now we're finding that we just have a lot of developments have overbuilt their parking and that there's an opportunity for redevelopment. Not only do we skinny up can we skinny up the drive aisles, the parking lanes, all of that. But we've touched on it before. We do a lot of studies where we're looking at infill, and this is one of our bigger projects, going from 750,000 square feet of office space across the street from a large regional mall and filling it in, doubling the square footage with hotels and other retail and things compatible with the office space, underground parking. Well, city ordinances require 2,500 parking stalls on the site. ITE, the parking generation document, leads to one thinking 21 to 2,200 stalls are right. Our own localized data led us to think that 1,600 to 1,700 parking stalls is correct because parking trends are going down in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area at least. So we went through the city process, and they're building about 1,800 parking stalls here, a significant cost savings there.
And you can see some green space in that on the one side. So they do have a proof of parking area if they should need it, but rather than having to pave it right away, they were able to add that green space and those elements to make the overall site just much better.
So the last challenge is really, we're seeing this more, and we're seeing this at existing targets and many of the other retailers trying to figure out this whole internet model of somebody orders something online and they go to the store to pick it up an hour later, and employees have picked it off the shelf for them. Well, where do people park? The worst case scenario, again, is at the front door. So do we figure out around the side of the building, almost like a CVS or a Walgreens pharmacy, a pickup, a drive-through lane? And then also we're starting to see Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. They're people delivery cars right now, but they're starting to do things with restaurant dropping off food, the Bite Squad model around here. And we're also starting to see them also doing, Amazon is experimenting with the 2-hour delivery. So sometimes those people are delivering people, sometimes they're delivering food from restaurants, sometimes they're going to a warehouse, but sometimes they're going to be going to the retail stores directly. So we think it's going to be very important as time goes on for us to talk with our architects and developers to educate them on this point and to start thinking about different zones.
And that's just like we were talking about with the school. What can we do to separate out these different areas and keep all these potential conflict areas apart and make for better traffic flow on the site?
Okay. So with that, we're bumping up against our time here for our half an hour. We're going to stay on the line and answer questions. We have City of Gastonia has one. We'll get to that, and please let us know other questions coming out of this. We do have a guide. You can either email Nancy, her email's at the bottom there, or you can text Traffic Corner to 44222 to get this guide with 16 different ways. We've touched on some of them here, but we go into some more nuanced topics of ways we think that we all should be working to move land development forward to take advantage of what's coming with autonomous vehicles. So questions, comments, and lastly, we'll let you know next month, we're going to be talking about retail stores and kind of from an access standpoint, where that traffic sweet spot, so kind of looking at different scenarios.
Access, volume, we looked at a few different factors and tried to, from the traffic point of view, what we think that sweet spot is.
Okay. So, City of Gastonia, is there a concern people will move further from work, suburbs will sprawl along the interstate corridors because the autonomous vehicle, they'll move faster? And also, if you can work in your car or even sleep or get dressed if you have no windows or whatever it is. I've heard this as well, and I think we are going to see a split, that this autonomous vehicles will allow much denser urban development, but we'll also see people who choose to opt out, and we will be stretching the metros. So I think planners need to be thinking all of those scenarios through and how that gets managed.
Next question we have, As they put it, a food for thought question: where do motorcycles fit into the autonomous future? And I could see a couple different ways here. The first, if you think about segways, other stuff, maybe they are automated also. So it's possible you could get down to smaller vehicles, motorcycle-like, that you don't have to drive, or it's very connected.
Almost a convertible smart car.
Yeah, something like that. The flip side of that, and obviously the concern for a lot of motorcycle drivers, is they don't want it to be automated. They want to drive. They want to drive along the coast, drive up and down the freeway, whatever it might be. That could be limited. Honestly, if we look at that future where government has to step in and say, no, for the safety of everyone, everything needs to be automated, that part could go away, but I could also see it where there are designated roads of human drivers. And it's a kind of, it's not going to be as safe. You take the risk if you want to, and here are those designated routes. So that's one way I see that fitting in. And I think that is more likely because I have a hard time seeing all vehicle drivers just banned instantly.
Well, yeah, it's not going to be an instant. I see a sunset coming, and this isn't the first time we've gone through this. The turn of the last century, everything was horses and wagons and those kinds of things. But at some point, for a while, vehicles and people and horses mixed on the street. You can look at historical society photos. You can see that in every city. And then at some point, it became illegal to take your horse and wagon into downtown Minneapolis. I took my daughter on a carriage ride this summer in Minneapolis, but talking to the driver, she has to stay on a specific route she was authorized for, and it's a sightseeing route, historical tour that they are licensed under. She is not a taxi. She can't go off that route. And I believe that's similar in New York and Manhattan. You can go around Central Park, but those horse and carriages can't take you from Central Park down to get on a ferry to the Statue of Liberty. Right. So we've been through this already. So I don't see that as the big barrier. Other people are talking about kind of the liberty standpoint of, I'm going to drive my car, but at some point the government
there's going to be a transition, and it's going to be a changed future. It's not going to be what we have now.
Okay, so we are over our time limit. Thank you everyone for hanging on. Okay, we got another question. We'll hang out as long as questions keep coming in. How will ride sharing impact mass transit? Transit volumes have been decreasing nationwide and locally. Yeah, I think that is the trend, and I think that trend is going to continue. And there's some interesting experiments being run of Silicon Valley types of kind of cherry picking with different technologies, kind of trying to bring Uber style vans to the busiest transit routes. So more and more, I think we're going to see the trend decrease. So then that becomes the interesting question of, when do we switch a transit provider from having fixed route LRT, which is very efficient if people will use it. Bus routes are efficient for moving people, but when do we switch more and more to transit offering autonomous vehicles that have more flexible routing? So I don't think transit's going away because we have underserved populations, but I think the autonomous vehicles is going to allow them to try many different models. And honestly, I think it will end up being better for many of the underserved populations, the handicapped, elderly, sight impaired. It's going to be easier for them to get a ride to from where they are to where they need to go without having to try to get through the current fixed transit system we have.
Yeah, I see it as much more door-to-door service and much more convenient as to when you want to go, as opposed to checking the schedule and when it's going to be available.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. So with that, thank you again. Please request the guide and we'll get that over to you, and appreciate everyone staying with us. Hopefully we'll see you next month.
All right. Thanks, everyone.